Hi and welcome. In this chapter, we will discuss about Amazon Elastic Block Store, which is also called as EBS. So, Amazon Elastic Block Store provides block level storage volumes for use with EC2 instance. So, EBS volumes are particularly well suited for primary storage for file system, database, or your virtual machines. So it is nothing but, for example, let's imagine if you wanted to create a virtual machine and you wanted to install the operating system to that virtual machine, maybe Windows or Linux, etc. So in order to store that the operating system details or data, you need to have a storage. So that storage is provided by EBS, which is also called as Elastic Block Store. For example, let's say this is your virtual machine. So this machine will comes with the storage that you need to attach while creating the VM. So this is called EBS. So you can use this EBS storage to store your operating system data or any application data, etc. So you can also use this for the database as well. So in a nutshell, EBS will provide storage for your EC2 or your database in Amazon Web Service, and it is a block level storage. So the features of Amazon EBS, the first one is you can create EBS volume in a specific availability zone and then attach it to an instance on the same availability zone. The meaning of this is, for example, let's say you are creating a virtual machine. So for example, you have a VPC. So in this VPC, you created three subnets: subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3. So maybe subnet 1 in one availability zone, subnet 2 will be in another availability zone, which is AZ2, subnet 3 is in another, which is AZ3. So now, if you create a volume, EBS volume in this particular availability zone, so you have to create a virtual machine in this particular zone itself, and then you can attach it. However, you cannot have your disk in this particular availability zone and your virtual machine sitting somewhere in the other availability zone. So you cannot map, this VM or this EC2 instance with the disk which is in another availability zone. So this is not possible. However, if you wanted to make use of this disk in another availability zone, then you need to create a snapshot and you need to copy it to the availability zones or the other regions if you wanted to make use of it. But by default, always you have to create a EBS volume on the same availability zone as your virtual machines. So this is the meaning of this first statement. So coming to the second, you can create your EBS volume as encrypted volume. So you can encrypt your EBS volume so that if the disk got compromised, nobody will be able to decrypt the data or read the data. So by default, when you create any EBS volume, it is not encrypted. You have to choose the encryption. So it is on demand. The third one is you can create point in time snapshot of ABS volume. So snapshot is nothing but it's a kind of backup you're doing for your disk. For example, let's say you have a EBS volume. So in this EBS volume, you have a data 50 GB data. Okay. So maybe this is in the first day. On the second day, on the same EBS, you're writing some extra data, maybe another 20 GB. So now the total size will be 70 GB. So 70 GB of data it is having. So on the third day, so let's say on the third day, somebody deletes the data, some data, let's say 10 GB data or 20 GB data from this. For example, let's say they're deleting 10 GB. So now it has got only 60 GB, but in the third day, it lost 10 GB of data. In Amazon Web Service, you have a feature called snapshot. So where you can capture the status of this particular disk or this particular disk on that particular day, so that it will keep a copy. So even though if you wanted to, let's say in this particular third day you lost this particular data, so you can bring back using the snapshot. So from the snapshot you can create a copy of the disk. So this disk will have all the 70 GB data. So this is nothing but snapshot creation. So coming to the next point, performance metrics such as bandwidth, throughput, latency, and average queue length are available through the AWS Management Console. So let's say if you wanted to check the bandwidth or throughput or IOPS or consumption of your EBS volume. You can check that in the AWS Management Console. So the last point is Amazon EBS provides the following volume types such as general purpose SSD, provisioned IOPS SSD, throughput optimized HDD, and cold HDD. So there are four types of disks available in Amazon. One is general purpose, then IOPS optimized, and then throughput optimized, and cold HDD. So each category will have its own specification. So as per your requirement, you can choose the best one which suits for your workloads. So let's discuss the most commonly used disks type, which is general purpose SSD and provisioned IOPS SSD. So the volume type, which you can find it in the Amazon portal, which is mentioned as GP3 and GP2. Similarly, for the IOPS provisioned, you can see IO2 and IO1. So the durability or the availability, which is 99.8 to 99.9% durability. So only 0.1 to 0.2% annual failure if you use this particular disks. However, if you go with the provisioned IOPS, which is IO2, which will provide 99.99% durability, it means only 0.0001% annual failure. So this is highly recommended if you are running a very critical workload. And then we have IO1, which is again 99.8 to 99.9% durability. It means it can have zero point 0.1 or 0.2% annual failure rate. So this is related to the durability and the use cases. So if you are running a virtual desktop workload, or if you wanted to use boot volumes, and if you wanted to use mid-sized or single instance database, then you can go with the general purpose SSD. However, if you have a workload that requires a millisecond latency or high IOPS, so let's say if your IOPS requirement is more than 64,000, then you need to go with IO2. So again, for the ION it is almost same. So this is IOPS requirement more than 16,000. So if you have IOPS requirement more than 16,000, you need to go with IO1. Otherwise, if it is more than 64,000, you go with IO2. And the volume size. So let's say if you wanted to spin up a disk which is between 1 GB to 16 TB, then you can go with the general purpose SSD. However, let's say if you have the requirement to spin up a disk which is ranging from 4 GB to 64 TB, then you have to go with IO2 block express, which is IO2. So similarly, when it comes to ION, so it can support up to maximum 16 TB of disk. So in a nutshell, if you have a requirement to spin up more than 16 TB, you have option with IO2 where it can support up to 64 TB. And when it comes to disk, IOPS are very important because that is the one which will do the real work. So if you have the requirement to support up to 16,000 IOPS, then you can go with SSD, which is general purpose one. But if you need higher IOPS such as 256K or 64K, you can choose this IO2 or ION. Similarly, throughput as well. So if your requirement is 100, if your requirement is 1000 MB per second, so then you can go with the general purpose. But if it is above that, you can go with as a you can go with IO2 or ION according to your requirement. So this is in a brief like what type of disks you have in Amazon Web Services, and based on your use case you can choose either general purpose or provision IOPS. So always you have to check this table, and as per this table you need to calculate your requirement. For example, let's say your workload requires maybe this many of the volume size or this many of IOPS or this many of throughput, then accordingly you can choose which one to go. So in a nutshell, general purpose SSD volumes are cheaper as compared to provisioned IOPS volumes. So this is the brief about Amazon. This is the brief about Amazon Elastic Block Storage.